Hello again and welcome back to my workshop for another of Harry's Jeti Clinic videos. And in this one we're going to respond to a request that was on RC Groups, a very large thread about Jeti radios, for a switch that runs a smoke pump, and it'll be a 3-position switch, and you can select off, on or pulsing. And that presents an interesting little programming challenge just to think up how to do it. So we'll use this 3-position switch where it's off, on, off, or pulsing. Now, pulsing obviously brings to mind thoughts of using a sequencer, which is fine, but one of the options in a sequencer is overwrite the channel, which we couldn't really do that because once we've switched the sequencer on and it's overwriting the channel, we can't switch it to permanently on. So we'll show how to use sequencers and logic switches to get exactly what we want here. And just to add the cherry on top of the icing, I'll show how you can make even more pulsing sequences, and I'll just make one more and add it to this 2-position switch, but you could make 2 more, so you've got 3 different pulsing sequences run through more 2-position switches or a single 3-position switch or so, or whatever. And a slight change today, I'm using this DS12 as a demonstrator. Rather than a 24, it's fully loaded with all the options, so I've got sequencers and logic switches, but it just demonstrates that the software is basically the same right across the Jeti family. It does mean I don't have the arms that hold the cradle, that hold the camera, so you'll have to put up with my little bit of camera shake. I'll do my best to minimize it. Right, so how do we do it? Well, basically we'll be setting up a logic switch, which in that position of the switch, it's an OR switch. It'll say, okay, switched on. There, it's switched off. And the other input to the logic switch will not be this switch, but will be the sequencer. However, the sequencer will be run by the switch in that position. So that's how we'll do it. And then we can cascade more OR switches for different sequences using other switches like that. If that sounds a bit, I don't see what he's getting at, let's go through it, and I'm sure once you see it in action, you'll get the sequence of what's going on. So let's pop in. First of all, I've already created a smoke function. There it is, but no control is assigned to it yet. And it's outputting on servo number 5. Okay, right, let's program. We go first of all to the sequencer, and we'll use sequencer number 1. What will the switch be? Well, the switch is going to be my 3-position switch and pulled downwards to run the sequencer for pulsing the smoke. So I put it to the mid position, which is 1 position away from the position I want it switched on. Go into the field, switch it on. You can see it's switched on there, it's switched off at both other positions. That's exactly what we want. Lovely. Say OK. Before we start creating the curve, we need to create 2 curves. One for when it's switched on, doing the pulsing, and a different curve for when it's switched off, so that it just goes straight back to the off position. If we didn't make it a curve in each direction, then what would happen when we switch it off is that it would, from wherever it was in the sequence, it would start running backwards to the start. So you could end up with it still sort of going through one cycle of pulsing even after you've switched it off. So we want to prevent that. How do we do it? Okay, come here, come down to the advanced menu. Let's go in there. Overwrite channel? No, we won't do that. Type of path, this is where we want it to be asymmetrical. So that gives us a switch on curve to follow and a switch off curve to follow. We will also be switching on cycling, but we won't switch it on yet because it'll be cycling through while we're trying to create the curve, and it'll just look a right mess on screen while we're trying to do it. So I'll come back and do that once we've created the curves. Say okay there. Up we go. Now, the first curve we will do is the switched on curve. So we need the switch actually in the on position, because it's going to offer us each of the curves depending on which position the switch is in. So there's no point in putting the switch to the off position, programming in our nice curve for the pulsing, because that's actually the off position curve. So we'll go for a 2 seconds on, 2 seconds off pulsing curve. So put the switch to the on position, activate this field, come along to the time 0, we'll want it switched on, so we'll create a new point for the sequencer. If you're puzzled about sequencers, have a look for my videos about sequencers. They are great, but there's a lot of things to set up and understand. Once you understand it, nice and easy. Okay, so we've got a point at time 0. It's just appeared there at the center. And we want to give it a value. Give it a value of plus 100%. That switched it on. So the point is up there now. Come back to the time. Run it along to 2 seconds. And add another point. So press the button here. So he puts another point in at the last value chosen. I'll come forward to 2.1 seconds, add another point, but now I need this to switch off. So come out of there, along to the value, bring it down to minus 100%. Okay, and then I'll run along to 4 seconds, add another point, which it will put in at the last value, which is that one. And there we are. There's our on-off sequence. Now, we don't know how long you want to switch the pulsing on for. So there's no point in us drawing out a great long sequence, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, going off to infinity. Well, it doesn't allow you to infinity. It allows you just a few minutes worth. So all we need to do is draw this one cycle and then switch on the cycling option. And what it will do is it will start there, switch on for 2 seconds, switch off for 2 seconds. When it reaches there, it'll jump back to the start point, which is on. So on for 2, off for 2, on for 2, off for 2. Okay, now I'll switch it off and watch what happens to the curve. Disappears. That's because we chose asymmetrical. We now have the off curve. Well, we just want off to go straight to the minus 100% position. So at time 0, value minus 100, I'll press plus, puts a point in. That's it. That's all we need to do. So when we switch it off, it'll go to that point. So we'll switch it on. As you can see, the sequencer is running. Watch it get to the end and jump back to the start. No, it doesn't, because we haven't switched cycling on. If we hadn't gone asymmetrical, then when I switched it off, it would run backwards through the sequence and switch on. But it doesn't, because we've gone asymmetrical, so it just goes off. Lovely. What we can do now is come down to advanced and say cycling. Say OK. Right, it's off at the moment. I'll switch it on, watch what happens. Runs through the on, goes off, and jumps back to the start. On, off, on, off. And it will keep doing that until we switch it off. And it goes to the off position. Okay, that's looking good. So we say OK to that. And come to logical switches. Logic switch 1. Enable it. Come down. Right, control 1, control 2, and condition. The condition is going to be an OR switch. So if control 1 or control 2 are on, the output will go on. And therefore we can select control 1 as the switch in the up position. The other two positions are off, like that. Say OK. So if that switch goes to the up position, the output goes on, and it will stay on until we switch it off. So that gives us the smoke pump on condition. Control 2 is not the switch, but the sequencer. So we go in there, press the plus button, come down to the sequencer, sequencer 1, say OK, and there we are. So let's test it. Here is the output that we'll send to the function. It's switched off at the moment. So let's switch the smoke pump on. It goes on and stays on until we switch it off. Now let's switch it to pulsing, and we should get the 2 seconds on, 2 seconds off, 2 seconds on, 2 seconds off, 2 seconds on, 2 seconds off, and it will just carry on like that forever until we stop it. Say OK. And now we can come back to the function. Oh, not servo, function. Sorry, it's because I'm watching the camera screen and there's a tiny lag, so I end up overshooting things. Smoke. Go in there, press plus. It's the logic switch. There we are. Say OK. We come out of there and have a look at the servo output. So servo 5 is the channel controlling the smoke pump. It's off. Let's switch it on. It's permanently on and will stay there until we switch it off. Now let's switch it to pulsing. And there we go. There's your 2-second on-off pulsing going. Okay, let's switch it back to the off position. And that's basically satisfied the request that was made. But I mentioned that we could add in more sequences so you can choose between them when you're flying. So let's have a look at how we do that. Back to advanced properties, sequencer, and we're going to come down, use the down arrow to sequencer number 2. And we're going to set up its advanced properties in exactly the same way. So it's asymmetrical. We'll come back to cycling once we've set it up. And there's the switch we're going to use. So we'll do the on position first. And this is its on curve. So let's go for 1 second on, half a second off, half a second on, half a second off, half a second on, half a second off, back to the start. So in sort of Morse code, it would be dash, dot, dot, dash, dot, dot, that kind of thing. You get the idea. You make it whatever you want. So at time 0, that's what we want. Add a point, take that point to plus 100. There we go. And then it will last for, what did I say, 1 second. Add a point. Then it will go off. I've overshot there. There we go. And it will go off until 1.5 seconds. Add a point. And then it will come on. Add a point. So there it's on. And it will stay there until 2 seconds. Add a point. And it will then go off again. So add a point. Change the value to the off value. Stay on till off until 2.5 seconds. Add a point, and then switch back on. So we add a point. Take it back to. Oh dear, just because of the lags, I'm slightly overshooting. It doesn't matter. We can get the value. There we go. And so this takes us up to 3 seconds. We want that. 3 seconds. Add a point. And finally switch it off for half a second again. So we come to 3.1. Add a point. And it'll be half a second's worth, or near enough half a second, anyway, to 3.5 seconds. Add that point. Okay. So when we switch this on, it will come on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, blah, blah. Okay, you get that idea. And we now need to set, as we did with the other one, as an off return field or path. So we switch it off, time 0 minus 100, press that. It's at minus 100 because that was the last value we programmed in, but whatever, time 0, set it to whatever value turns up, set it to minus 100. And that's our path there. Done. Okay, come back to advanced, set it to cycle. Say OK. And now let's watch it. Switch it on. So it'll happily sit there going through all those pulses. switch it off, goes off. OK to that. Now let's go to logic switches. And we'll go to logic switch 2, which will be much like logic switch 1, be an OR switch. But in this case, the first input is going to be logic switch 1, so that it feeds through the whole system. And then control 2 will be sequencer number 2. And we can watch the output from logic switch 2's output here. So back to the original one, we switch on, it goes on, and it stays on. We switch off, it's off, and it stays off. Now this should give us the 2 second on, 2 second off sequence, as we can see here. Okay, and with this one, should now give us the 2 on, half off, half on, half on. So long. There we go. Say OK to that. And now all we need to do is change the control in the function from logic switch 1 to logic switch 2. So we clear that out, plus logic switch 2. OK, OK. Let's have a look at the servo just to prove it. There we are. OK, smoke pump is off. I will switch the smoke pump on. There it is, it's on. I'll switch the smoke pump off. I'll switch it to sequence 1, which is the 2 second on, 2 second off. And there it is running through that quite happily. 2 seconds on, 2 seconds off. I'll switch it off and we'll go to the sort of dash dot dot sequence. There we go, dash dot dot dash dot dot dash. There we go. So you can have fun with whatever sequences you like.